Welcome to Sisters with Superpowers, a series where we uplift the brilliance, resilience, and revolutionary impact of Black women who are shaping culture, conversation, and the future. I'm Tanya Williams, and today we have the extraordinary honor of sitting down with a true trailblazer, Barbara Brandon-Croft, the first nationally syndicated Black woman cartoonist in mainstream media. For the Detroit Free Press, her groundbreaking comic strip, Where I'm Coming From, broke barriers and redefined what it meant to tell stories from a Black woman's perspective in a medium traditionally dominated by others. With a pen that is both powerful and precise, Barbara has used her art to spark conversation, reflect truth, and challenge the status quo. Barbara, we're so honored to have you with us on Sisters with Superpowers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. I like to start with the question that I pose to every guest, which is, what is your superpower? I'll say before you give your answer that after studying your work and understanding who you are and what you are able to communicate, I feel like it's really seeing Black women and being able to communicate what we're thinking in a way that is just really great. And so I'm just wondering, to me, that's your superpower, but what do you say your superpower is?
Well, let's see. I mean, that makes me feel like that is my superpower, that I've been able to record and Black women's history. It's a way of an ability to give Black women's voices in a larger scale. And that's what I've been able to do. And I didn't think of it as a superpower, but I realize when I talk from to people that it really kind of is, that I'm doing something that makes people feel heard. And that's kind of an incredible thing to be able to do. When somebody tells me you're telling my story, I makes me feel like, wow, I am doing this. So I never think of myself as a superpower, but in that context, I think I'm gonna hold on to that label.
Yes, definitely receive that. How did your journey as a cartoonist begin and what first drew you to the world of comics?
So people who don't know me should know that my dad was a cartoonist and he was one of the pioneer Black cartoonists. And my dad was Brumsic Brandon Jr. He had a comic strip Luther. There's Luther up there on the wall. And and that's his painting over there. I have that behind me are both of our works. But I grew up immersed in comics, in the comic world. And typically people think of that as comic books and superheroes and things like that, but that's not the kind of comics I grew up with. I grew up with my dad's comics. And not only did he do Luther, he did quite a few strips. He was prolific. And when I say quite a few, I say that lightly. He did billions of strips, and he did for the Freedom Ways, which is a Black journal, and he did it for Black Resources. And a lot of his cartoons were most of them were considered editorial cartooning and definitely focused on what the conditions were in this country. So I grew up with that kind of sensibility. And my dad worked from home. And when I was little, he used to work in the living room, not the living room, the dining room, which was the center of the house. I grew up on Long Island. Newcastle was a Black community on Long Island, and the dining room was the center of the house. And my dad set up his workstation on the dining room table. We had to take it down, for 5 o'clock dinner, but every day that's where he was working. So I saw it being done. And not only that, when he started getting very busy between that, and he did a television show that was on WPIX in New York. He was Mr. BB on Time for Joya. And so he did illustrations for them. He did illustrations for lots of things, other things. So he did a daily strip. So he needed help. And he gave me and my brother a drawing test. We had to draw one of his characters on a light box. And my brother was awful. I mean, he's a great fisherman, don't get me wrong, and
Right.
he's a great science teacher and all those good things. He does not draw. That's not his thing. And I won. My dad was like, okay. So I kind of grew up working on comics. I would put on what was called the Letratone. Well, I used Letratone, he used Zipatone, but it's the film on the original artwork that gives color. I mean, I guess everybody does that by computer now. but it was a physical thing that you had to do, and it was tedious, and he's like, "I think you can handle that." So that's what I did on the comic strip, on his comic strip. So I was trained to be a cartoonist from early on, and I was immersed in comics. So it seemed like a natural progression, even though I didn't think that's what I was gonna do. But here I am
I
many
love
years
that.
later.
I really love that. I was thinking about, as you were speaking about how your dad worked from the dining room table, I'm reminded of Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. She talks about how her dad, when he was in law school, would study in the living, or in the dining room,
Yes,
at
yes.
the table, and she would sit with him and draw and do coloring books and things like that.
Yeah.
So that must
You
just
soak it up, you soak
there.
it in. Yeah, yeah.
There for sure. With your dad's influence, what lessons did you carry into your own work and how you express your artistic voice?
Let's see. My dad's number one thing that he said many, many, many times was that a cartoonist's job, their duty, is to observe, interpret, and record. So that's what I got from him. You look around, you see what's going on in the world, you take it in, you think about it, and then you record it. And that ends up being a way of telling history in a more palatable way for people who don't want to read big history books. People are reading less and less. But if you can go back through some cartoons from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, all through these times, if it's done authentically, you can really get a sense of what was going on in the world and how I'm talking from a Black perspective, but how we made it through those times. And it tells a history, it records a history.
That's beautiful. Where I'm coming from gave voice to Black women's thoughts and fears and frustrations in a really groundbreaking way. What inspired you to create the strip, and how do you decide what stories to tell through your characters?
You know what? Like I said, I did not know I was going to be a cartoonist. I went to school to study art. Still didn't know. I didn't even know what to major in. I was all over the place. Went for 4 years, didn't get my degree, but I went there for 4 years. I did, the work. But
Mhm.
you have to be focused. You have to know what you're doing. I needed somebody to I needed a guidance counselor like I had in high school, to tell me this is what you need in order to graduate. So I had billions of credits, enough to graduate, but not in any kind of concentration. All that to say that I did not know I was going to be a cartoonist. So I ended up trying to figure out what I was going to do when I moved back home. And I saw a job for a fashion reporter, an illustrator, no, a fashion reporter. And I liked fashion. I was like, and it said trainees considered. So I went in and said I would be a trainee, and I took my portfolio. They needed somebody to write, and they needed somebody who could draw some illustrations for them. I got the gig. So here I was, a fashion reporter in New York City. It was a small trade publication, but it was national, and so that's what I was doing. And I wasn't making enough money. So there was a new Black woman's magazine called Elan coming out. It was going to rival Essence, it seemed. And I got a meeting with the editor-in-chief there. And she's like this iconic literary agent now. Her name's Marie Brown. And I got to meet her and talk to her. And I took my portfolio again. I'll say, I'll do anything. I would like to be a part of this. And she said, well, you're kind of funny. You have a sense of humor. You draw. Maybe you can come up with a comic for us. And then it was like, bing, I could do that. So it's like, had I not seen my dad in the dining room and then later in his studio he built in the basement, had I not seen that, I don't know if I would have been able to say, yes, I can do that. It just I saw it done. That's what's called, when you representation, it was living in my home. My dad was there doing the job. And I was like, yeah, I know how it's done. So I tried to come up with an idea. So initially I didn't have any ideas. But after a while, I thought about it. I was like, let me just do something to who I know the readership is, which was primarily Black women. So I was like, what, I'm just going to talk from Black women's perspective. And initially, I just had heads. I never added environments and all that. I just had heads, talking heads, and talking about stuff, as, anywhere, any kind of thing that occurred to me. And I thought that I would have a different woman every time I did the strip. So hence the where I'm coming from. This particular woman is coming from this place, and this is what she has to say. But the magazine folded before I was published. They said they liked it, do some more, let's figure this out. And then when I was ready to come back, they had folded. For me, it seemed like a natural progression that I would send it to Essence magazine. It's a Black women's magazine. I developed this for Black women, and I sent it to them. And I called them like every week. I was like, "What do you think? What do you, well, but we looked at it, we like it, but we don't think we want to put a comic strip in the magazine. But what are you doing? Because you're not making it as a cartoonist, but what are you doing? It's like, I'm a fashion reporter. It just so happened, this is serendipity. I don't know what to call it. It just so happens that Paula White, who was the fashion and beauty writer there, was getting ready to go on maternity leave, and they needed somebody to step in. And I'm like, I can do it. I don't know anything about beauty.
Incredible.
I know. I was like, I don't know anything. And Mickey Garth Taylor, she was like, we'll teach you. And Ionia Dunley was the fashion, Mickey Garth Taylor was the beauty editors, and they're like, we'll teach you. And I took a test and they liked it. I got the gig. So I ended up working there for, almost 6 years as a fashion and beauty writer. But then my dad got a letter from Detroit Free Press, mainstream newspaper in Detroit. And they are like, we want our pages to reflect our audience, our readership. Do you know of any Black cartoonists? And of course, he knew me. So he said, yeah. It's like, so he said to me, you're going to do this, or are you going to just talk about doing this? Challenge taken. I sent the same exact strips that I created for Elon to Detroit Free Press, and they liked it. And they're like, you know what, we're going to do this. We can do this on a weekly basis. And I started getting published and started getting recognized. Yeah. So,
That is
and then I knew I couldn't make it on one paper because I quit Essence. I was like, are you kidding me? But I quit. I was like, I'm gonna be a cartoonist now. But you can't live with just one newspaper. So I knew I needed a syndicate because then again, I'd seen my dad all his life. He was with Los Angeles Times Syndicate, and they are the ones who, what syndicates do, they act as if they're an agent. They have all this like bevy of cartoonists, and they send out the cartoonist work to all these newspapers that they already have relationships with and say, do you want this additional cartoon? And the paper picks it up, they pay the syndicate, and the syndicate pays you. So I knew I needed a syndicate. I also knew that that's how syndicates work. So I put together a press kit on my work and sent it to all these syndicates. And I got rejected by all these syndicates except for one, Universal Press Syndicate, and One Is All You Need. They
yeah.
picked me up.
Yes.
Yeah, they
I
yeah,
say
they
it all
picked
the
me up.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
You need
They
to
picked me up. So I started being syndicated. So I first appeared in Detroit Free Press in 1989, and then I started being syndicated in 1991. And they kept me on until 2005. And that's how it happened.
Wow, that's an incredible career in that. And even when you weren't drawing, you what brought you to the table to Essence was your comics,
Yes.
were your comic strips. So that is really fantastic that it's carried you all this time. What's it like navigating the comic syndication world as the first Black woman cartoonist with a nationally syndicated strip? And did you feel the pressure, pride, or was it a mix of emotions as you had to deliver the commentary of the day, really?
It's interesting because all the syndicates, even the one that picked me up, was told me that it was going to be a tough sell, because it's just you're not putting environments in. It looks different than what they're accustomed to. The size is different. You want to do a weekly and not a daily. And lucky for me, my syndicate feels that the artist needs to make those kind of choices. So I agreed that I could whittle down, instead of, 56 different women, each time I talked, I'd have a new woman that I whittled it down to 9 women of particular positions or of particular personalities, and that they would all be friends. And so after a while, I started developing, instead of just the one woman speaking to the reader, sometimes I had the characters talk to each other, and I would let the audience feel or the reader feel like it was as if they were eavesdropping on a conversation, a personal conversation. So it's kind of opening up a window to let people know what people outside of the Black community, outside of the Black women community, know what's on our minds and what we're thinking and what we're doing. But I was not the first Black woman in newspapers. I was the first Black woman in the mainstream press. So, and by mainstream, that is the white press. So 30 years before me, there was Jackie Orms, who did a comic strip called Torchy Brown. She did several comic strips. She was great. I encourage anybody to do some research and look at her work and figure out her work. But she was in the Black papers, which distinguishes me. So I crossed the color line, like I guess Jackie Robinson, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? From the
yeah,
Negro League to the,
absolutely.
Major League, so
You
that
created
is
the
my
mainstream media. Yeah.
yeah, that's my distinction. And it is the mainstream press and the mainstream syndicates are white men, typically older white men. So I never had a problem with that. I'm going to just stand up to them all. This is me. If you want to ignore me, that's on you, but you're missing out. Because as Black women have things to say. There's when the strip first got started, I got a lot of publicity, and I will never forget. Good Morning America, lovely. That's big time. Good Morning America, and just before, they say action. I was sitting there with the interviewer. Can't remember his name, but that's just probably shouldn't call out people anyway. But sitting with the interviewer, a white man, who just before they started the interview, he said, "How is this going to work? How are you going to get more than 12 papers? Thinking about only Black cities would be the
My
newspapers that would
God.
be interested in picking it up." And I was like, "What?" And then it was like action. It was like, oh, so I was kind of off my game. It's like, but it's interesting to me too that there were so many who thought that not enough people would be interested in what Black women had to say. And I take that as a direct insult. It's like, are you kidding me? You're not interested in what we have to say? You better be. You ought to be. So,
You ought to
that's
be for sure. Just ask
yeah,
the 92%.
yeah.
Be
Um,
very interested.
yeah. So it wasn't all that easy when I go to, the national conventions or whatever. Even now, I'm invited this weekend. I'm going to Boston for the Boston Comics in Color Festival. And it really makes you feel good to be around other Black creators and have a chance to talk about what it's like to be a Black creator in this, you know, non all Black world.
Absolutely. Your strip, as we've talked about, it often addressed race and gender and politics and in a really unflinching way. Why is it so important in art in general to tell political and cultural stories, especially at a time like this?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's kind of therapy. You know, there's so much going on right now, and people have spoken to me and said, when I first started doing the strips, I did do a wide range of things, relationships, finances, what's going on with your finances, just things that were on my mind as in my 30s, at the time, because that's basically when I was doing the strip, and also political, because that was also on my mind, what was going on in the news. So I would put that in from time to time. And I was encouraged to do that from the syndicate I was with, and which was great. It's like, don't hold back, push the envelope. I'm like, all right. But I find now that I'm not with a syndicate and I just put it out for myself
Mhm.
because it's a kind of way for me to get it out of me instead of holding on to it. And I also hope that it continues to be a thing where people can read it and say, that's what I was thinking. I'm glad you put it to words. Sometimes you have these strong feelings, but you can't articulate what it is about the situation that is bothering you. So I like to think that my characters are pointing out very specifically why we feel a certain way. So I guess that's would be my answer as far as, why I chose to do what I do. It's helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful to others to to feel like they're heard and seen and maybe even understood, you know? So,
I definitely, as I was looking at some of your work on Instagram,
oh,
uh,
yes.
and all of the comments were like, "That's so true." And I was looking at some of them, I was like, "Hmm, exactly." So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely a picture into what we're feeling right now. Your characters and where I'm coming from each have such distinct voices. Are they inspired by real people or people in your life, or how did you decide kind of what personality they would have?
Well, I think I'm a bit of all of them, you know, but I also have a lot of girlfriends, you know, so maybe snatch or take a bit of this and that. When I was doing it for the syndicate, I was living in Brooklyn at the time, you know, single living in Brooklyn, girlfriends talking, you know,
Mhm.
it was a way to just eavesdrop, and I do eavesdrop on people. And, you know, like that was crazy, you know, whatever somebody just said, you know, but you know that it's real, you know. Um, so that's the way I did it then. So let's see. I This when I started trying to whittle down the number of women I was using, they started to develop. I started using the same person to talk about certain things, like say Jackie, who's like very anxious and
Mhm.
very anxious. So like I can do, you know, I can do things with her when I want to talk about anxiety or, you know, what is going on in the world, and you know, like tears are flying out of her head and she's shaking, you know, all of that. Because you're a cartoonist, you can exaggerate. I can use Jackie, you know, if I want to talk about something political, I usually use Lakeisha. She's the one that kind of has the stylized dreads, and
Mhm.
just having a strong social conscious and feeling that social justice is mandatory. I'll use Lakeisha, but they all have that kind of stream of social consciousness underlying, you know, because that it too is what I believe people have to be. That's the way you have to be. My one character has a kid, she's a single mom. What I've done more recently is that, you know, she has a cap that says, I am woke. And you know, the strip is like, say it loud, I am woke and I am proud. You know, so she is the person who her interest in social issues expanded when she had a child and she's seeing what's going on next in this world. So I can use her for that. Then, you know, I have a flighty character, you know, Nicole, you know, is just only in concern with herself and how she looks and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so it's people I know, it's parts of me, and that's where they come from.
Well, that's the beauty and complexity of women generally. We are all a little bit of that, all of that. And I love the way their hair and their features, because there is no environment, they take up the space, which I think is really symbolic and really great for the reader and the audience to see.
Yeah.
You've opened so many doors for many Black women creatives. What advice would you give to young illustrators and writers who are looking to follow in your footsteps?
It's funny because, you know, me being like the first, I felt that was complicated because there I was the first, but I felt like I was maybe inspiring younger people or younger folks coming up, but I was also in the door, you know, because they don't, you know, you're not more than one person is accepted at a time. We have Barbara, we don't need anybody else. So for a time there, it was a complicated way to think about it. But in general, I would tell everybody to keep doing it, you know, keep drawing, you're only going to get better. Keep writing, you're only going to get better. Keep at it. Don't let no bring you down. Let it, you know, embolden you. You're like, no, I think not. You know, I do have something to say. I do have something to express, and trust that trust in your individuality. Don't try to be somebody else. Be yourself because nobody can be you. So just do you. That's what I say.
Mhm. And finally, as you look at today's social and political climate, as we've talked about, what do you think the role of art and specifically Black women's voices in art is in moving us forward?
It's necessary. You know, it's times like these where you need creatives to express themselves. And, you know, when in a time where you feel so helpless, like things feel like they're out of your hands and out of your control. And And in some ways, they are out of your control. But this is a time where artists and writers need to speak up. If that's all you can do, if that's the only thing you can do, speak up, express yourself, put it out there, let it be known. I think that's what I would say is these times really call for it. I don't remember who said it, but it was one of our smart women from who said, this is precisely the time
I think it
to.
was Toni Morrison, I
Yeah, I
think.
think so
Yeah,
too. Yes, yes.
yes.
Said this
I was
this is
thinking about that.
precisely the time. Yes, to create and put it out there and keep and feel all the emotions you feel and put that into your work. And it's a great way to record our history years down. We can look back at different things that were created during this time and try to understand how that fit into this crazy time.
Absolutely. Well, Barbara, thank you for your fearless dedication to telling our stories. Your work is not only historic, it's healing. And we've been made, and you've made room for us to be seen, heard, and remembered. And so thank you so much for joining us for Sisters with Superpowers. And I really I appreciated learning about your work and thank you so much for joining us.
Wow, thank you. I really appreciate having this space here, talking to you and putting the word out there. I appreciate that.
Let me ask one more question. How can people get in, follow your work and follow your book and things like that as they look for more of your expressions and things that we need during this time more than ever?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked that because I'm like, I just realized I didn't mention my book.
Yeah,
But
no.
but I do. There's a book out now. It's been out this a couple of years now, but it's a hardcover book. It tells my story, my origin story, and it tells how I got to where I am. So it's not only selected strips from the time when I was syndicated, it's also stories about how I became syndicated and this and that. But you can get anywhere you get books, you can find it. It's called Where I'm Coming From. Hold
There
on.
it
Hold on.
is.
This is what it looks like. So I would love for people to get it and read it and it's kind of like a history book, honestly. And but it's got cartoons. It's all cartoon, mostly cartoons. And I have a website. It's my name, Barbara Brandon-Croft @.com. And I also am on Instagram, like you mentioned, and I have the very creative handle of Barbara Brandon-Croft. So that's how you can also find me. But I did get a blue check. So it's if you see the blue check next to my Instagram, you know that it's actually me. So yeah.
Well, that makes it easy to find you. And once again, thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate this.